Hi, you're listening to the Android Guys podcast. My name is Scott. I'm sitting here with
Luke.
Hello, Luke.
Hello.
So this season of the podcast, we're going to do something a little bit different.
Uh-huh.
We're going to get in a time machine.
Ooh.
And we're going to go all the way back to the beginning of Android.
That was quite a while ago.
Yeah. So, I mean, we've been doing this for a long time, right?
Right.
So it's 2021. We have to go back technically all the way to 2007 if we want to go to the beginning of Android.
Right.
But we're not going to do the full every step of the way kind of thing. We'll just, for the sake of keeping things lively and light and not getting too into the weeds, we'll just kind of talk about the various versions of Android as they were released, and we'll tackle the major updates each episode.
Sure.
But we'll also do it in a bit of fun, contextual look at history.
Yeah, kind of give you a mental snapshot of maybe where you were at that time, or the you being the listener, or us. Kind of what was happening in that time.
It's really interesting to go back and look at Android and see things that at a certain point you're like, oh my gosh, that wasn't a part of phones. You couldn't do that. Or, oh, I forgot that they actually didn't bake that in until, 2016.
Right.
So that's what we'll do this season. We're going to start with Android 1.0, which actually, for a lot of people, they don't even realize that Android 1.0 wasn't released to developers ahead of the first phone.
Yeah.
It came out with the first phone, or right around the same time.
Right.
So we're talking all the way back to September 23rd, 2008, or right around that time when Android 1.0 was released. And at that time, that was the T-Mobile G1. It was the very first Android phone. Luke, what do you remember about that time? I mean, 13 years ago.
So, I mean, in preparation for this series, we kind of went, what was happening in the world. And, I mean, 2008, personally, I had a 4-year-old.
Right?
No, I had a 1-year-old.
No.
Yes, I had a 1-year-old. I'd been married
That's
for
right.
4 years.
I had a 5-year-old at that time.
Yeah. And so, I was working at a cell phone company, and I was very into that technology. And we had heard 2007 Open Handset Alliance, Android's here. It's coming. This is what it is.
Right.
And we're all like, okay, this is cool. And then to get the hands on the G1 and see the realization of that, it was exciting.
So we had to wait pretty much a year, 10 months or so before we saw the first phone.
Right.
I mean, we were covering Android on day one, and the idea of all of this promise and all of these players that are coming together in an alliance, and wanting to change the cell phone industry and move it forward, super exciting. But then it was like 8-10 months of almost just reading tea leaves and silence and wait and see.
Like, this person's on board? Okay, I wonder what they'll bring.
Yeah, it was a very interesting time, and we were literally able to capture and keep up with everything going on in the space in our spare time.
Yeah.
And now you can't even begin to pretend to tackle the space. So there were rumors that Google was going to have its own G phone or iPhone killer.
Yeah.
And then that ultimately turned out to be the G1, and that was a device from HTC. So do you want to talk about what the phone was able to do, or do you want to talk about the software?
Sure, we can talk about the phone. So it launched with a 528 megahertz CPU.
And that's a single core for those listening. You know, a lot of stuff we look at today is like quad core, octa core, and they're 2 gigahertz, 2.3, much faster. We're talking a single core
Yep.
at a half of a gigahertz.
Right. And let's see, 256 megabytes of storage.
Yep.
Expandable on a 16 gigabyte micro SD card. 192 megabytes of RAM.
And now we're talking phones that are 8 gigabytes, 12 gigabytes,
Yes.
6, in the mid-range.
Right. A 3.2-inch touchscreen, which was not bad.
No. I mean, it was one of the only options on the market that you could touch.
Right.
That,
But the resolution is a 320 by 450.
480.
480.
My
Sorry.
handwriting is poor.
It's okay. It's okay. Yeah.
A fraction. I mean, it was like less than, you're looking at about a half of HD's resolution.
Right. But on the phone, when we had it,
Yep.
it was clear. It was a very nice looking screen.
Right. And it was as good as anything else on the market.
Right.
There were very few things. There were some smart things, some BlackBerry devices out there that, you were able to kind of do enterprise things in text. But the mobile browser, the mobile experience was kind of like, it's definitely ugly compared to today. But at the time, looked great.
Yeah.
So this also had, a 3.15 or 3.2 megapixel camera.
Yeah.
One camera on the back. There was no front-facing camera at the time.
Well, and the 3.15 camera was like the standard for the nicer phones at that point.
Yeah, there was a lot of like 1.2.
Yeah,
2.1.
But it was pushing the boundaries slightly. I think there were a couple other handsets that danced around that 3 megapixel spot. But that was a selling point.
Mm-hmm. So you remember the device, right? It came in 3 colors. There was black, white, and then there was like the bronze kind of finish too.
Yeah.
So we talked about the touchscreen, but there were also 2 other ways of input on this thing. So
there was a full QWERTY keyboard on the slide. You slide the screen up.
Yep.
And then there was also a trackball.
Yeah. You can hear right now. If you think about it, you can hear the G1 clicking open.
Yeah.
Right now, I have one around here somewhere.
You can also feel the dust getting under the trackball.
Yeah, yeah.
And you can feel that swipe. I remember when it first came out, messing around with it and going, I bet someday I'm going to have that golf game, the Golden Tee that they have.
To roll the trackball.
I'm going to use this trackball to play like a golf game.
Yep.
And it came eventually on some other devices. But the trackball, that kind of phased out relatively quickly in the scope of things.
Yeah. It was, we've been Android apologists and fanboys pretty much since before day one. But for the devices, it was in hindsight, and even at the time, you could admit that it was like, well, it's not a glamorous thing. This matte finish, and it's not as sexy as
the little hinge, the little bump out at the bottom where the trackball was.
Right.
It wasn't. The phone was not ergonomically
sound.
Yeah, it wasn't practical. It felt a little strange in the pocket. You got used to it.
Yeah.
But even then, it was a pretty big phone for the pocket compared to some of the other devices.
Yeah.
Now, if you were a Sidekick user, that was nothing new. You were like, oh, this is normal. Or a BlackBerry user, they're kind of floating around that size. But
this is just a few years after the Razr was kind of like at its peak, so people were getting used to that thinner design, Samsung Katana. It was bulky. It was, when you looked at it compared to the iPhone, it was very easy for people to say, I like this because it's more sleek. I think it's sexier. And then the other people were saying, I like this because it presents choice and it represents, user options and freedom. Yeah. That was a really big thing at the time.
Well, and it was stock Android.
Yeah. It was our first time seeing it.
There was no wrapper on it. We were used to different companies now putting their flavor into that software, but this was just it. There was nobody saying, we'll make your phone if you let us put in some of our own stuff.
It's got to look a little bit like our carrier. It's got to represent the brand a little bit.
It was stock.
So this was an HTC phone. For those listening, HTC is a former major player in the handset space. They still exist today, but it's largely centered around VR. But yeah, HTC, and at the time, I mean, they had been around for a few years making handsets, but it was kind of like white labeled and it was branded around the carrier. So it might have been a T-Mobile, Wing or Dash or I'm trying to think what I had, the MDA.
Yeah, and those were all Windows Mobile.
Yep, Windows Mobile.
Yeah.
So it was kind of nice for them to step out and get a little bit of shine at the time and kind of announce that they were a player in the space.
Yeah.
So let's talk about the software and what phones, were capable of.
Sure.
This is Android 1.0. So this is, the very minimum of stuff that was baked into and was more or less consumer ready. An HTML browser.
Yeah.
Chrome wasn't even really a thing. On desktops, really, it had just started to become an alternative to Firefox. So Chrome wasn't even really a thing. So this is a HTML browser, which is a big deal because it was not, a WAP browser. It wasn't something that was just kind of like text based or ugly just menus. It allowed you to kind of like see full websites.
Yeah.
At the time of whatever websites look like.
Yeah.
There was no Play Store for those. There was no Google Play.
No.
It was called
Android Market.
And when it launched, it promised how much selection, Luke?
Dozens.
Dozens of apps.
Dozens.
Yeah. These were all free at the time.
Yep.
This is before there was a way to do a revenue sharing or offer, like, take payments or anything. This is very primitive, but at the time it was really cool to go in there and think, I can add this to my phone and make it more capable to do these things.
Yeah.
A really interesting thing for people who didn't follow it closely, but more casually, what the smartphone space looked like, to be able to tell them, hey, this has, Google features. This has Google Calendar, Gmail, YouTube capabilities. These are things
YouTube in your pocket.
Which is weird, right?
Yeah.
Like, we take that for granted. Now
that is the general mode of ingestion now, right?
Yeah. It's just so surreal. And now, as we look at these features, there was Google Search, the power to search Google from anywhere on the planet, provided you had either
Service.
Wi-Fi or, at the time, 3G.
Yeah, it was a 3G capable phone.
And one of the best things about Android was, real-time notifications from a variety of sources. It wasn't just text and phone, but here, you have an email that showed up right now.
Yeah.
And that was a big deal because BlackBerry was pretty much, the mover and shaker and kind of
they were definitely the leader in that space.
Yeah, and it was like, oh, you want an email right now and you want to be able to reply to it in the field? You want a BlackBerry.
Yeah.
So this, on the heels of the iPhone at the same time, was, wow, I can do that?
Yeah.
From my phone? I remember having conversations with people a year, 2 years later, and hearing them kind of like wowed by the idea of like, wait, so you're telling me if I email you right now, you're going to get that in your pocket?
Yeah.
Like, yes. Get out of here.
Yeah.
Like, no, that's for, but that's where we are now. It's like, that's one of those things you just take for granted.
Yeah.
So Android was a completely different animal at the time. Now, speaking of time, let's look at what the world looked like.
Oh, yeah. This is the fun part. This is the part that's we're going to say some of these things and you're going to go, wait, that was then?
Yeah, that's when Android came out? What was in the movie theater?
All right, so notable movies at the time of Android release. Tropic Thunder. Pineapple Express, and The Dark Knight.
Probably one of the best Warner Brothers, Batman, anything.
Sure.
You look at it and go, that's awesome. It's been around forever. It's a staple. This is 2008.
Yeah.
The Dark Knight had just come out a few months earlier,
Mm-hmm.
or was, still playing in theaters at that time. That's the thing, is like Android is as old, or Android 1.0 is as old as the Dark Knight.
Right. How about television? What was on there?
So, plenty of TV shows have come and gone over the time of Android.
Sure.
So specifically for Android 1, at that time, thereabouts, TV shows that were making their debut, which are really no longer on the air,
Right.
have already aired multiple seasons, concluded. Fringe, a show that we both liked
Yes.
on Fox, True Blood,
Oh, wow.
and Sons of Anarchy had
All at that time.
just started. So it's these things that, for those listening, if you discovered on your streaming service, you're like, oh, here's a show that I like.
Yeah.
That's how old these are.
Yeah.
And some of these things are like, as you get older, you start to appreciate
Right.
how quickly
Yeah.
time moves. But it's really interesting to look back and go, whoa, that's when Android came out. So, and we'll wrap that up. Music. What was on the radio?
So notable, like, we just pulled Billboard top.
Yeah.
For that time. So What by Pink. Whatever You Like by T.I. and Hot and Cold by Katy Perry. These were the songs dominating the radio and the charts at that time.
Which is, again,
It seems so long ago.
it does. Like some of those things where you're like, well, that song's always been around.
Yeah.
For pop or, R&B, some of that stuff just seems like it's an institutional track.
Right.
Katy Perry at that time was really just starting to take off.
Yeah.
So she's had an entire career, like, in
Yeah,
parallel.
she's an American Idol judge now, or was
Right.
even.
That's paralleled Android. So
Right.
it's really interesting. So if you're listening to this and you're hearing these things and you think, oh, that song is really old. Well, so is Android.
Yeah.
It's a software. It's a platform. We look at updates like, we're currently looking at Android 12.
Yeah.
The beta release, and then that will come out here maybe in the next couple of months,
Sure.
we expect. But yeah, it's come a long way. Luke, let's go back to the phone real quick. The T-Mobile G1.
Yes.
At the time, cell phone companies had locked people into contracts.
Yes.
Some people may not realize that.
Yeah.
That, if you wanted a phone, you had to commit to the service for 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
What was the price of that phone?
I want to say it was $180,
Yep.
something like that. That's with the 2-year contract, and yeah, we've since gone away from subsidizing handsets.
Yeah.
You're paying for them. Now there's the installment plan,
Right.
so that's a little bit easier than swallowing a big chunk of money up front.
And that's an interesting thing in of itself, because phones, the true cost of them hadn't quite been realized.
Nobody really knew.
Yeah.
Well,
So
what do you mean? This phone was, you had people come in and have a broken BlackBerry or something. Well, I got this for $200.
Yeah.
Well, it's a $900 phone.
Right.
What?
Yeah. That's this compact HP iPack or whatever it was
Yeah.
at the time. Those are expensive.
Yeah.
So yeah, that $200 or $180 at the time seemed really reasonable.
Mm-hmm.
I can't remember what the rate plan. I want to say it was like $35 or something that
Yeah.
included your data.
Yep.
Of course, this is 3G, so we didn't know there was a 4G, and
Yeah.
3G had just kind of come into its own at that time, and there were even, like, in our market, had just gotten started.
Right.
A couple other features that were in phones, just for the sake of comparison. The battery was an 1150 milliamp battery, where today's are routinely 3,000, 4,000.
Right.
Bluetooth 2.0.
Yeah.
So we've come a long way in Bluetooth technology.
Yeah.
it was not stereo.
Right.
If you had Bluetooth, everything was, headphones were mono.
Yeah.
So, or speakers or anything like that.
Yeah.
One of my favorite times, one of my more fond things to think about is like the very beginning of Android, because it was just kind of like the sky's the limit.
Yeah.
This is the first device. This is, T-Mobile is, now, they're one of the biggest players in the thing, but they were scrappy. They were willing to take a chance.
Guys, yeah.
And completely different than what we had with, where we are today. They were behind Sprint.
Yeah.
At the time. So
now they own Sprint.
Yeah. So when you look at where T-Mobile has come, where Android has gone, HTC has come and gone, and where we are today, it's quite a big difference. So
what was one of the biggest features for Android at that time that kind of, I think, blew most of the people away? Or I remember showing people my phone and them going, "Oh wait, you can do that and move that around," and is widgets.
Yes. So there were a few that were baked into Android.
Yep.
And you could really customize the home screen to look how you want. So you and I could buy the same phone, but they don't look at all like each other.
Right, which was not possible. I mean, you could change your background picture, and that's how you would make your phone distinct.
But if you want your clock here,
right,
and your icons over there, that was something that, that's just, we get our phone and we just immediately start to do that today.
Right.
At that time, it was, wait, I can do that?
Yeah.
So, and this is before, this jumps ahead to other versions of Android, but this is before they gave other applications the ability to create a widget.
Right.
It was, here is the, default set of widgets from Google. Anything else that you want to bring up or that you think about?
The only other thing that I see here, there's two things I see on the list of Android One features that just completely forgot about. Amazon MP3 support. So there wasn't YouTube Music
or Google Play Music.
It was still through Amazon MP3 because they were the dominant force.
And before Spotify and Pandora and any of those really took off.
And then the other thing is Google Talk.
That's an entirely different conversation, because we don't know what that truly became, because there's still multiple versions of chatting in real time. But Google Talk. And I remember being able to log into my Gmail account and seeing little indicator lights of red or green, and I would know who's available.
Yeah.
But it also told me who had an Android phone.
Yes.
I can tell by logging in. It's like, oh, Luke got an Android phone.
Yeah.
Or Sean or whoever I knew at the time. That was, really a whole different world. And we could probably spend another half hour just going through memory lane as to what we remember of the time. But that's, in a nutshell, and that's what we'll do with each of these episodes, is talk about the phone of the day, or phones, to kind of give some context to today's, kind of juxtapose those, the space of what the phones were capable of. Because as we start to go through these releases, some of these manufacturers were putting things into their device from a hardware or software level that Google hadn't done through Android.
Right.
That would later be, integrated. So there was some definite innovation as we get through this. But Android 1.0 was just a very, and to me, I always look at it as, we were beta testers.
Right.
We were real time. This didn't just take off and sell millions and millions of devices, and everybody, it was kind of like you have to know about it. You have to want to take a chance on it. And it was different.
Yeah.
So I think that's going to do it for me. I don't really have anything else without boring some of these listeners. Yeah. It's more personal anecdotes of the time. But so that's going to do it for Android 1.0 and the T-Mobile G1. And then in our next episodes, we'll start to get into cupcake and dessert, and not desserts. And sweets and other things. that are maybe more familiar names for people.
Yeah.
Because there wasn't even a formal name.
Right.
So, Luke, thanks, man. This was
No
fun.
problem. It's a good time.
We will do this again soon.
Yep.
See you guys.